Recording. Wonderful. Welcome everyone to part 2 of Israel in 2023, a story in 10 t-shirts. Last week I wasn't in a t-shirt because last week we kind of did the pre-t-shirt session. We did the session of kind of looking at the background to all the democracy protests that were going on. And I spoke about it last time that really the t-shirts kind of only started coming in a little bit later when people realized that holding a sign in your hand at the same time as holding a flag in your hand is a little bit of a challenge and gets a bit tedious. So t-shirts became the big thing. I'm going to share some slides again with you. Like last time, if in the middle of me talking, you have a question, don't understand something, are curious about something, just interrupt me. Either put your virtual hand up or just interrupt me by unmuting. I don't always see the chat. So if you're trying to communicate with me through the chat, that sometimes causes me a problem because I have too many screens that I'm trying to have open at the same time, and then I get confused. So if I don't see the chat, I apologize. I will see it once I take the slides off. So let me just share the correct screen with you. There we are. So Israel in 10 t-shirts, right? I'm gonna just go back to our overview slide, just putting in an extra t-shirt here. This was one of the t-shirts that was designed in about July, when the protest movement kind of reached its peak. There was a competition, I think. Maybe it wasn't a competition, but as Israeli graphic designers decided to jump on the bandwagon of the t-shirts, and they did a design collection of limited edition t-shirts of design. Here is one of them, Democracy Established 1948, the Civil War Collection, Israel Autumn Winter 23. It feels quite heavy now to think about this now that we know what is happening kind of in winter of 2023, but at the time really all the attention was on the protest movement. And actually a nice story about the t-shirts were sold through a restaurant restaurant and bar that supported the protest movement a lot. And they as is typical, I ordered t-shirts. I asked my friend to collect them. When she came to collect them, there was total chaos. Too many people, nobody knew whose t-shirts. So she collected my t-shirts. But somehow the restaurant thought I hadn't collected my t-shirts. So they kept sending me messages saying, you can come and collect your t-shirts. And I kept writing back saying, I've already collected my t-shirts. But they seem to, the email seemed to not really get through. And after the 7th of October, unfortunately, they actually WhatsApped me and said, we haven't heard from you. We just wanted to make sure you're okay. So kind of a typical Israeli story, total chaos, but a lot of care. So these are our 4 sessions of Israel in 10 t-shirts. We did how it all began, the judicial overhaul in a year of protest. Today, we're going to look in a bit more detail at the protest movement, and the diversity of the protest movement. Next week, we're going to look at the end of democracy, question mark, and a focus on the reasonableness clause. And then in our final session, we'll look at October the 7th and its aftermath. Today's session, a closer look at the different groups. The protest movement became an enormously large movement of hundreds of organizations. There were almost 200 organizations that became part of the protest movement. Some of them were really, really tiny groups. Some of them were very large groups, very established groups. Some of them were groups that were new, some of that newly emerged through this protest movement. Some of them were pre-existing groups, and we'll look at that a little bit. The interesting thing is that not all of the groups kind of became really associated with individuals. So a lot of the groups were actually extremely egalitarian in their nature, and where people kind of just claimed affiliation with the group by buying the T-shirt or actually in most cases all the swag, all the T-shirts, all the flags were given away for free, and then people were asked to make donations. So in a lot of cases, people just kind of found their home, picked different things on different occasions, lots of people feeling dual affiliations and so on. But great diversity. These are all pictures taken from an afternoon, kind of going into the evening. This is April 2023. It's one of the first protests that I went to in Israel. Actually, the first one I went to was in February, right? We started in January in the pouring rain, actually. But this is now April. Things are starting to be quite professional. The protests tended to happen, the major protests tended to happen until we hit the moment of crisis, which we're going to talk about more next week, tended to happen on Saturday evenings. Normally after Shabbat, so after sunset. But as you can tell here with the light, people were starting to set up already as there's still daylight. You can see here in the bottom, right, everyone, the thousands of flags, right? The protest movement really re-embraced the flags, and you could almost not escape being given a flag. If you forgot your own flag, you were given a new flag. There were so many flags. It was a little bit controversial, actually, also with the T-shirts about, are they all ethically produced? Many of them were from China. And there was a bit of a discussion, right? Should we be buying from non-democratic countries all our swag for our pro-democracy initiative? So that was kind of one of the things that was hanging in the background. But you also start seeing kind of the different here, each group having its different stand. We'll talk about the Pink Front in a little while. Here, I don't know, a little later on, I have a fuller picture defending Israel's declaration of independence. This is a out of cardboard, they made a tank, a life-size tank. Actually, the people, so these are the tankists, the tank units from the Israeli army. They did a lot of demonstrating together. They wanted to bring an actual tank, but they discovered that that was actually illegal, even one that was no longer in use. You can't just, if you're not in active military procedure, you can't just drive it down a main road in Tel Aviv. So they made a life-size tank out of cardboard and put up their tank. They also set up a tent next to the Supreme Court, which they manned 24/7, saying they are here to defend the Supreme Court judges. If anyone would come to defend this, to attack the Supreme Court judges, they would be there. So here are the tankists. And then this is just sort of, there were a number of kind of just general there were a lot to do with the re-embracing the Declaration of Independence, right? And you see here how this works, like piles and piles of T-shirts. You can throw some coins in. Normally there was like a QR code somewhere where you can scan so you can pay online. And this is Tel Aviv, huge stage setup. This is what this looks like at night. And the text here reads Rak Demokratia, only democracy. So this is Tel Aviv. We should start with the story of the diverse movements in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is the center of always the big demonstrations. And you know, the demonstrations at the peak reached over 400,000 people. And you have to imagine this is not a large country, right? The Jewish population of Israel is probably around 7 million. So if you think about 400,000 of your 7 million showing up, it's a lot of people. It's really a lot of people. We'll have an aerial view of just one of the junctions in just a moment. But our story has to start in Tel Aviv. This is the place of the central protest. It's not the only place, but it is the big place, and people came from all across the country. So when I was in Israel, I was living near in and around Jerusalem. I moved around a little bit. We would come down to Tel Aviv on Saturday night. On the way there, it would take an hour to drive there. On the way back, it would take 2.5 hours to drive back because the traffic was totally crazy. Just getting out of there was like madness. But that's what people did. And literally week after week after week after week, every Saturday night. So if we start the story in Tel Aviv, we do also need to start the story with Shechma Bresler. She is in real life, she became really one of the faces of the protest movement. In real life, she's a physics professor. She's a particle physicist. She very well known theoretical particle physicist, not your natural person that you would think of as a major protest leader. She's a mother of 5. She's 43, a mother of 5. So a former professional basketball player, very versatile woman, really, but really one of the became the spokesperson in a sense, and her up there holding the flag in one hand, speaking with the other, really became an iconic image. Shechma Bresler was involved with the protest movement before the 2023 pro-democracy movement. She was part of, so in 2023, the movement became known as the Kaplan Force, Koach Kaplan, because the main street where the demonstrations were taking place was Kaplan Street. Traditionally, the demonstrations took place at Rabin Square, but Rabin Square was under construction. So Rabin Square was out, so everyone moved on to Kaplan Street. Shechma Bresler became known already prior to that for the Black Flags movement. I don't know how many of you remember the Black Flags movement. Started in 2020 and was really the first movement to try and oust Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. They had adopted the Israeli flag together with a black flag as well. She is probably her most noteworthy moment in this protest movement was, and we'll talk about that later in next week's session, was that in really kind of Moses-like fashion, she decided when the Knesset was really convening to debate the final reading of the bill on the reasonableness clause, she decided Tel Aviv needs to come to Jerusalem, and she led a 2-day march of thousands of people from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And like more and more people kept joining. Josh and I joined on the last day for the last stage. We only did 8 kilometers. Wasn't that far, but it was really, really hot. And she went holding her flag up high ahead of everyone. Again, very iconic images. And so this Koach Kaplan kind of really became associated with these mass protests. So here you see, this is just the central junction. So you see here the central junction. One of the reasons why it took place here is you can see here the edge of it, that the IDF headquarters are on this junction in Tel Aviv. This is the edge of it to the IDF headquarters. And what was the case was always there was a central stage where the speeches were happening. There were always each week a different kind of big banner was lifted up. And then you would see really all the way down the street in both directions would be people, and there would be screen after screen after screen after screen, so that people could see what was going on. Now, unsurprisingly, this required quite a lot of setup and skill. So the other group that we need to turn to is the high-tech protest. So Moshe Radman Abutbal probably is the person who was most well known from the high-tech movement. He's a high-tech CEO. And he was arrested numerous times. Also, Shikma Bresla was arrested. The leaders were oftentimes arrested for incitement to illegal protest, or so Shikma Bresla, for instance, was arrested for incitement to blocking a highway, because what the groups would do as part of the protest is the demonstration would happen, and then everyone would spill onto the highway, onto the motorway, the ring road, or the road sort of along Tel Aviv, and try to block the major road. And that's where normally incidences with the police happened. The high-tech groups were absolutely critical in the protests for a number of reasons. One, funding. The protests were not cheap. This stuff costs money. Putting up, like, it was basically like a music festival week after week after week after week. It costs money to have sound engineers, tech people, graphic design. Well, it either costs money or people volunteering their time. A lot of the time people volunteered. But the money from the high-tech groups was absolutely critical. The other thing for which the high-tech movement became really critical was that they produced a lot of the little video clips and maintained the WhatsApp groups and set up other kind of technology solutions. So for instance, there was you could download an app. I think I'd said this already last week. You could download an app, and if you had a little bit of spare time in the middle of the day, you could open the app and it would tell you where there was somebody near you, a politician from the government coalition, that you could stage a mini protest against. So, or you could, there was an app where you could sign up to volunteer, and there was, various things. Worthwhile mentioning with Moshe Radman Abutbul is that, and part of what happened was with the protest movement is that the government and the right-wing parties tried to discredit the protesters as being out of touch, elitists, wealthy, Ashkenazi, and not really in touch with the real people. So Moshe Radman decided to put his mother's maiden name, Abutbul, to adopt his mother's maiden name in addition to his to their family name, to remind people that he is his mother is of Moroccan descent, and he actually grew up in a fairly deprived, mixed Jewish-Arab town called Lod. It's in the center of Israel. He didn't really emerge as a leader through kind of the organizational channels, but he went viral. He produced all the viral videos. So that's how he became known. And the high-tech movement became a very visible presence, right? The slogan "Save Our Startup Nation," or "Ein Demokratie, ein High-Tech." Without democracy, there won't be high-tech. And this was really the first time that the high-tech industry decided to enter into political debate in Israel. Until that point, they had sort of stayed away from it. But the high-tech industry realized very quickly that if Israel was going to go down the path from illiberal democracy to effectively dictatorship, that would be bad for business. That would mean the businesses would move away. So it wasn't a very selfless motivation necessarily, but nonetheless, it was it really motivated them, and it really motivated them to turn out onto the street. And the high-tech industry, for instance, was the first industry that joined in with the ideas of general strikes. So there were a number of days when there was a general strike or a day of disruption called for. And depending on your industry, either the union called for the strike or even your employer supported you in taking a strike day. So the high-tech industry basically closed down for those days and said, we encourage our people to go and demonstrate. So we have Kaplan Force, Shikma Bressler, the particle physicist. I think we might hear her in a moment. I think I have a video of her as well. Then what we also have, and you see here, this one behind me, the T-shirt, the red T-shirts, the red T-shirts, Bonot Alternative, Moran Zer-Katzenstein, one of the founders of it. She's a marketing executive. The group is called Ma'avak Hanashim, the struggle or the protest of the women, but really was known as Bonot Alternative, building an alternative. I think I haven't actually checked this, but I think the term, the word is actually the name of the group is actually based on the pun from the Talmud, where it reads, there's a passage where it says, where the Talmud misreads a quote from the Bible that talks about your sons, banaich, and it says you shouldn't read your sons, you should read bonaich, your builders. And banot, if you but not if you, the builders, if you put the vowels differently, it's banot, the girls, the women of the alternative women. The movement actually, Banot Alternativa, started before the current protest movement, so it was not a new movement, although it became really only well known through the 2023 protest movement. It started in 2022 in the city of Eilat in August 2022, following a horrific gang rape incident. And the group, it was a feminist group that started to protest, very small activities, lobbying for gender equality and preventing violence against women. And what's interesting is that Moran Katzenstein actually grew up in a religious family. So she's not from a, unlike Shechma Bresla or Moshe Ratman, she's not from a secular Israeli family. She's from a traditional religious family. However, she did always grow up with women's issues at the heart. I said she's a marketing executive. She actually used to work for Coca-Cola. Maybe that's why they are in red. I don't know. Maybe that's why she chose red. For Bonat Alternativa, they were also one of the first groups, or one of the groups that joined from day one of the protests, because as Moran Katzenstein argued, it was clear to them that any attack on democracy would automatically lead to an attack on women's rights, and would automatically endanger women's rights, and therefore they really embraced the protests. And most famously, they were the group that started the Handmaid's Tales protests. So the Margaret Atwood book, and also then series, right, of the Handmaid's Tales, these iconic outfits, and they started to stage kind of in a like installations, moving installations. So they would get hundreds of women dressed in these identical outfits, and it really stood out. So you could always really see them. They did some beautifully choreographed moving in circles and so on. If you search for them, you will see, you will find lots of videos on YouTube. If we have time at the end, I have some saved so that we can look at some of them, and some of the videos that I'm going to play, I think we'll see them as well. So they became very iconic for this using kind of ad hoc performance art as a way to draw attention to the demonstration. There was a little bit of an element, of course, of you need to keep people entertained so that they keep coming back, right? So there was also a little bit of a performance around these demonstrations. Often they had big names of bands playing and so on, because they recognized that, you know, there's only so many times that you can listen to the former head of the Bank of Israel tell you that this is going to be terrible for the economy, or to listen to another retired Supreme Court judge to say that this is all awful, because that's all a bit boring. So part of this was also around trying to make sure that the atmosphere, the demonstrations, was such that it brought people back. In addition, what we saw with the demonstrations is that they picked themes. So the different groups kind of got their highlight weeks. Oftentimes, unfortunately, because of sad reasons. So the focus on women happened, for instance, in the week after there was a well reported, not here, murder of a young woman, honor killing of a young woman from an Israeli Arab town. And then there was a week on violence against women, deadly violence against women, the focus. Also, a number of weeks focus on the number of Arab Israeli citizens that were murdered. In 2023 saw the highest murder rates in Arab Israeli society, really for like gang violence kind of thing, nothing to do with Middle East conflict. Generally speaking, Arabs killing Arabs. And the police didn't seem to do much about it. So those kind of things actually became part of the narrative. But Not Alternative weren't the only group that did this performance art. So another group that formed, they didn't really have a name, were groups of people who dressed up in this outfit. I couldn't figure out, I did some research, but I couldn't find probably an artist who came up with the idea. This was in response to Bibi Netanyahu granting Ben Gvir, one of the most radical right-wing ministers in the government, his own personal militia. This is kind of the protest against the militia. I need to do this differently, otherwise you don't have any sound. 1 second, I'm gonna stop my share for a second and make sure I click the button. I have a short video of it. So you see, they would move very, very slowly. Sorry, this is my own videography. As I was looking through all the videos, I was like, God, I take terrible videos. But so they would move very, very slowly through the demonstration. This is the demonstration. It's a daytime demonstration. It was while the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations of North America was meeting in Tel Aviv. And initially, Bibi Netanyahu had said he would come to speak and address the conference. So thousands of Israeli came to protest. It was really impressive. I had a ticket for the gala event. There was a very strange tension of, we were in there and there were all these demonstrators outside, and you could hear it even in the exhibition hall. You could hear the noise from the demonstrators. We actually decided in the end to leave in the middle because it just felt so wrong to be in this event so out of touch with what was happening outside, and joined the demonstrators for a little bit. Next person I want to introduce to you is Eyal Naveh from Brothers and Sisters in Arms. In real life, a real estate developer. He was really one of the leaders, one of the spokespeople for the group of IDF combat soldiers who refused to continue to serve in the reserves. And this was really part of kind of the turning point of the protest movement. So if we think back about our timeline, right, at one point, everything seemed to like already hit the brink of civil war because Gallant, the defense minister, resigns in light of the fact that there are all these reservists are refusing to serve. In particular, of particular importance, the fighter pilots, because the Israeli Air Force is to such a large degree dependent on reservists, but also other combat soldiers. And the combat soldiers really were, some of them were not that young anymore, but they were really always the ones that were like right there when things started to get really ugly, which sadly later on it became more and more because the Ben Gvir, who's also Minister Ben Gvir, who's also responsible for the police, kept instructing the police to violently disrupt and break up these demonstrations. And in general, it would always be the brothers and sisters in arms right at the front, here directly facing the water cannons. Now, my assumption is that most of you have never been water cannoned. It's not that great. It's really, really a strong, you kind of can't stand upright anymore. So here the people are already fallen onto the ground, right, with the water after being sprayed with the water cannon. So this would be what would happen. They would spray them with the water cannon and then kind of try to drag them off. That's why you always have the police right around the water cannon so that they could then drag people off. Right at the end, when the reasonableness clause is passed, they also started using the water cannons with skunk water. So here you can just see the water cannons with the blue water. The blue stains you, like it's a stain, also so that the police can recognize who they've water cannoned. Skunk water is like absolutely disgustingly smelly, as the word implies. It's one of the most effective non-lethal crowd dispersal methods in the West. Apparently, they tried to export it to India, and people really didn't mind. So I think sensitivity to smell is, or different smells is different. So in India, it was really not effective. In the West, it's, if you're right there, it's so intense that it makes you vomit. So you really cannot stay, even if you're quite a long way away. You have to go. It was in 2023. It was the first time ever in the history of the State of Israel that it was used against peaceful demonstrators in Israel proper. In general, skunk water is used in the West Bank, generally against Palestinians. And there have been a number of incidences where it was used in ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. But they had some real riots in ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods over the years. And there have been occasions where it was used. So this is our brothers and sisters in arms, right, in the sort of greenish fatigues color. You can see it really well, the t-shirts here. So those were the t-shirts. So I thought, who do I have to contrast it with? The Pink Front. So in contrast to the fatigues, the Pink Front, again, not a new protest group. The Pink Front also formed in 2020, and they especially started to stage kind of protest actions at the start of the second lockdown, when people were starting to say, actually, the government is also doing this to prevent protests against the government happening. So that's when the Pink Front became famous. And actually, the picture in the middle that I've shown you, this is one of the original 2020 protests, where they, and you can see that it's a 2020 protest because they wore the pink bandanas because you had a mask. There was a masking requirement, so they would wear these pink bandanas still because of the because of COVID. But really they are a very loose movement. People just decided to adopt the pink color. They always had drummers, things like flares. the protests were unbelievably loud, so earplugs really important. They didn't really have a specific kind of political leaning. They were like for democracy, for freedom, against the government, against government restrictions, and so on. And the pink Israeli flag became very iconic, and you saw it really everywhere in the protests. And then there were, as I said, there were hundreds of groups, so I don't have time to go into all of the groups, but there were the doctors or other healthcare professionals. There were the psychiatrists for democracy. There were the academics, right? So here, bli demokratia ein academia. Without democracy, there is no academia. And of course, also the student protest groups, different student protest groups. As I said, the Israeli reform movement decided from the start to join the protest movement. In the beginning, still with banners and posters. Here you see all the assembly of all the posters. And then later here you see me with a small group. This was our carload full of reform protesters, all with the green t-shirt, which I'm wearing now. And on the t-shirt, it says, the same as on the banner, in the name of Judaism, we will defend democracy. It was really interesting how many people commented on how important it is, even in secular Tel Aviv. Like, and people like kept asking me, can I take a picture of you with the t-shirt? So I don't have time to go into all the fantastic signs that people made and outfits that people created. But it was a very creative movement. Jerusalem's protest was a little bit different. Jerusalem, not so much high tech, much more focused on coexistence. So in Tel Aviv, you saw almost no Arabic, except maybe in the week where the Druze joined the big demonstration. In Jerusalem, you would see Arabic. So it's a bit cut off, but my picture was cut off, so I couldn't give you more of this. But based on the bit of Hebrew that I've got here, and my Arabic reading is not so good anymore. But I think this banner read Demokratia lekulam. So democracy for everyone. I'm guessing it said exactly the same thing in Arabic. And Jerusalem was the Shomrim v'Shomrot al Habayit HaMeshutaf. In English, they translated it as safeguarding our home, but really more literally, it means protecting our shared home, much more of a sense of coexistence. I have one of those t-shirts here. And what was also very iconic for Jerusalem was the red line. We had this red line, big sausage thing that people were holding up in the air. My husband kept saying, there's something very wrong that we keep crossing the red line. So it wasn't like fully thought through, but we always had our red line. Jerusalem, not as big a protest, so normally not the hundreds of thousands, but also 20,000 or so. Jerusalem also much more religious. So in Tel Aviv, you hardly ever had the rabbis talking, although you did occasionally have rabbis talking. In Jerusalem, you generally speaking had religious people also. So interestingly, Jerusalem much more religious. Also, Jerusalem much more lefty, explicitly lefty. So one of the things, for instance, that the high-tech protest group was criticized for was that they didn't want to use the term occupation. They said it's not helpful, it divides people, this is not what it's about. In Jerusalem, it was clearly also about the occupation. There was a small anti-occupation block in Tel Aviv. In fact, the picture here at the top is from Tel Aviv. But really the major anti-occupation block would be in Jerusalem. One of the things that happened, I forgot, I didn't put the picture, I might bring it next week, is that they decided very early on to ban the Palestinian flag. So in the first weeks, people came with the Palestinian flag, then they banned the Palestinian flag. So you did get some people drawing a Palestinian flag, and then you started to see the imagery of the watermelon, with the watermelon having the colors of the Palestinian flag. So people would carry signs with watermelons as a way of showing solidarity. What was interesting with the pro-democracy movement was it was the first time in many decades that the occupation started to be part of the mainstream discourse. And even in Tel Aviv, which was not as lefty, people started to talk about the fact that maintaining an occupation is already an erosion of democracy. And that in a sense, you shouldn't be totally surprised that governments that have kind of maintained occupation for decades will also erode democracy further. So Jerusalem, though, bigger anti-occupation bloc than elsewhere. Another thing that was really wonderful with these protests is it was the greatest civic education for children. People came really with their kids on the whole. I know I've shown some pictures of violence, but violence was really basically restricted to when people blocked highways and so on. In the main demonstration area, there was no violence. You could very easily avoid it. You had to kind of, I mean, there were sort of times when, as it was getting later, that things suddenly escalated, so you could get a bit caught up, but not really. People came with their small kids and so on. And in Jerusalem, towards the summer, when it was school holidays, the kids' corner emerged, where the kids decided to give their own speeches. I've got a really short video of it. So the kids are talking, this was the week when they were talking about women's rights and women's equality. And the kids decided also to give speeches about equality. And they told examples from their own life when they had experienced inequality. And it was really fabulous. It was just like one corner at the side of the demonstration. They had their own speaker, their own stage. At the end of these two girls announced, anyone else want to give a speech? If not this week, sign up for next week. So it was really sort of through the generations engaged. And some of the things where then we saw art installations, right? We saw the tank already. I'll show another picture of it. Music played a big role. I could do a whole session on the music of the protest and the songs of the protest. We don't really have time for it. But I wanted to, I kind of highlighted Jerusalem and Tel Aviv because these were really the major places. Haifa was also big, Beersheba, the bigger cities had big demonstrations. But many of the demonstrations also just happened on bridges over the highway. So on the next slide, I'm going to show, there'll be a video in the middle, which shows just one of those protests on the highway. And you see, not everyone likes the protest necessarily. So some people beep to join in, and some people shout abuse. And you would drive through Israel, and suddenly there would be like people on a bridge waving their flags. It was really unbelievable that all over the country there would be these in totally rural area just pop-up protests, just the neighbors coming together to protest together. So with that, I'm going to take my slide share off for a second. I want to give people a chance to, if you have some questions or comments, to ask things. And if there's not lots of questions, then I will show you a video. Otherwise, we can do video later. Any questions or comments?
Leah, can I have a
Yeah.
question?
Yeah, please.
The military bit that you showed earlier on, were all dressed in black. Was the goose stepping significant?
Was it, sorry, say the last
Well,
bit.
they were marching in a goose step fashion. Was there a reason for that?
So I think what they were trying to show was that this was like going to be a militia. And I think what they were trying to imitate was a little bit also Nazi imagery
Yeah,
and
it was.
so on. So it was it was performance art. So clearly everything had significance, right? It wasn't spontaneous. None of, like, also the handmaids protests, right? These were not spontaneous protests. They were choreographed. So yes, they tried to say this is like we are creating like an SS.
Right. Okay.
And we shouldn't. It was one of the things that the protests were really worried about, is like, will we become a country, a fascist dictatorship, effectively?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I was thinking of that, but I wanted to hear it from you.
yeah, yeah. And people were really, I know I started with this image of civil war, but people were really talking about it. It really felt like, are we at the edge of civil war? And I will show, I think Judy might have a comment or a question. Judy, just unmute yourself, and then I'll show after your question or comment another little video.
Yeah. The children seem very, I don't think sad is not the right word, but they're very grown up, some of them. And do you think they're growing up very quickly, and is that a good thing or not, given the situation? I was very impressed with some of the things they said, or their answers, or their general demeanour. So I wonder what you thought about that.
So I think they were very, so part of it was that they were taken really seriously,
Yes.
right? And I think therefore they felt like more grown up, and they practiced, right? They had gone for weeks and weeks and weeks and seen other people do this. And it became kind of, I think, I'm not just saying this about civics education, like people started to talk about what is the value of democracy? Why does it matter? And I mean, how many young people, even teenagers in this country, have no clue, right? Or I will show you next week with the pro-democracy protests, the tent city that they set up in the park under the Knesset. There was this beautiful scene that I just happened upon. Rabbi Gilad Kariv was there, also stayed the night, a member of Knesset and Reform rabbi. And he was surrounded by young people who asked him questions about how does the Knesset actually work? How is a law passed? What's a filibuster? Right? Because suddenly people were like thinking about it. And I think this is why these kids kind of grew up in that way. They were still kind of kids. They were funny and quirky, and not everyone just like knew how to hold a microphone and stuff like that. But it was very mature on one hand and
Mm.
still kids on the other. Celia.
Did you see Alexandra's comment at all? He wrote it.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Celia,
Can
yeah.
I just come in about the children in Israel? I think also it's a characteristic of teens in Israel, and that is that they grow up anyway, even before the last year or so, with everything that's been going on. They're given a lot of freedom and they develop very fast, partly because there's this feeling, it's not expressed necessarily, but you feel it. They're all going to have to go to the army. They're all going to grow up really fast. So they better enjoy those years and learn to be independent. They go out. They're clearly less protected on the streets than ours are. It's also a characteristic of Israeli society, I think.
Yeah, and oftentimes it was like the kids who would sell things at the stalls and stuff like that. It was one of the bridges that I used to go to quite often. So oftentimes on Saturday, what I would do with friends is we would go to like more than one protest. So the local protest on the bridge happens while it was still Shabbat, because it was kind of local and so on. So we would go there at like 4 o'clock, wave our flags for half an hour, say hi to a few people, sing a bit, go back home, pick up a snack, and then drive to Tel Aviv or drive to Jerusalem to go. And like for these little ones, you know, there were little kids who would sell you the swag and so on. I'm going to show you one more video, which is has a little bit you'll see a bit the Margaret Atwood Handmaid's Tale kind of performance in it. You also see the Red Line in Jerusalem. In addition to this like blow up Red Line, they did a piece of in an art installation where they drew a red line on the road in Jerusalem between the Supreme Court and the police headquarters, because Ben Gvir was associated with the headquarters. So I think that's also in that video. It's you'll hear the president of Israel speaking. Sorry, 1 second. I need to make sure I actually share with the sound. Yeah.
מי שחושב שמלחמת אחים של ממש, של חיי אדם, היא גבול שלא נגיע אליו, אין לו מושג. דווקא עכשיו, בשנת ה-75 למדינת ישראל, התהום במרחק נגיעה. מלחמת אחים היא קו אדום. אני לא אתן לזה לקרות, בכל מחיר, בכל דרך. אבל אני באמת מאמין בכל ליבי, שאנחנו ניצבים היום גם בפני הזדמנות כבירה, היסטורית. הזדמנות להסדרה חוקתית, מאוזנת, חכמה ומוסכמת של יחסי הרשויות, במדינה היהודית והדמוקרטית שלנו, במדינה האהובה שלנו. דמוקרטיה!
We are here to protect our democracy, our country, because we feel that our country is under a brutal attack of the government, the Israeli government.
So we don't have time for more videos, but we shall watch a bit more video next time as well. I hope this gave you a little bit of an overview of kind of the variety of the movement, that there were some really lefties, but also some really, like, you know, the high-tech people, the doctors. Wasn't really about being lefty or righty, right, or something is making a noise. Let me just stop that. Really different parts of Israeli society. Thank you very much. If somebody has still got questions, you can still unmute and ask, but our hour is up, so I'm going to say good night to those who want to go to bed. So lovely to see you, and next week we'll march to Jerusalem together for the unreasonableness clause, or the reasonableness clause, depends on how you see it. So thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Leo.
Thank you,
Bye.
Beverly.
Thank you.